Big stress test for the West's rule-based order. Or French judges take it all in stride. Opening day of Marine Le Pen's appeal against a corruption conviction that, for now, bars the far-right frontrunner from the 2027 presidential race. With the verdict expected in July, that's getting awfully close to Election Day next spring. The National Rally leader and her supporters have branded the case lawfare, a political vendetta. Recently, she voiced her support for another convicted politician, Nicolas Sarkozy, who became the first former president in France to serve jail time since the end of World War II. In a new book, he too cries that the fix is in, a message broadly amplified by right-wing media echo chambers. So, what are the facts of a case where 24 others have been convicted for funneling EU Parliament staff funds back home to the mothership? Do said facts matter in the end? Is France like the United States, which denies plans to put pressure on judges in the Le Pen case? And what about her party's Plan B? Could voters simply turn the page on the scion of a far-right family and happily elect her number two, Jordan Bardella, as France's first far-right president since Nazi occupation? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Marine Le Pen's appeal. With us, criminal attorney Camille Gosson. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Joining us as well, journalist Thierry Lévesque, author of, it's written in French, so I'll translate it, The Continent of the Forgotten, about how France learned to investigate cold cases. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
She's a municipal councillor, deputy mayor for Paris's 18th arrondissement. Gabrielle Siri-Wary, spokesperson for the left-wing coalition candidate for mayor of Paris, Emmanuel Grégoire. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You can always listen, like, and subscribe to the France 24 debate wherever podcasts are streamed. Yeah, Marine Le Pen's fourth run for president on the line, opening this Tuesday at Paris Central Courts of her trial, along with 12 of the 24 others that are appealing their graft conviction. Emerald Maxwell has more.
The French far-right leader needs to have her graft conviction overturned, or at least reduced, to have any chance of running for president in 2027. Last year, Marine Le Pen was sentenced to 4 years in prison, with 2 years suspended, and fined €100,000. She was also handed a 5-year ban on standing for election, effective immediately.
This is not a legal decision. It is a political decision.
The court had found her guilty, along with 24 former European Parliament lawmakers, assistants and accountants, of misusing European Parliament funds to employ national rally staff in France between 2004 and 2016. Formerly known as the National Front, Le Pen rebranded the party after she took over from her openly racist father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, transforming it from pariah to frontrunner. Marine Le Pen made the runoff in the 2017 and 2022 presidential elections, and before her conviction, 2027 looked like her best chance yet at the country's top job. Le Pen has always maintained her innocence and is appealing along with 10 others of the accused. The hearing is expected to last a month, with a decision expected this summer. If the court upholds the first ruling, Le Pen could still appeal to France's highest court, but a decision would not come in time for her to join the race.
Camille Gosson, during the initial trial, Marine Le Pen was criticized for being too confrontational with the magistrates. On the eve of today's opening of the appeal, she promised a different strategy, and most notably, she'd been criticized for arguing that, because of her job, that she shouldn't even be on trial. Your thoughts on the facts and on the way the case has been presented?
Well, the argument that Marine Le Pen should not appear before judges, French common judges, is an argument that other politicians have made in the recent years. And 2025, I believe, was, some might say, a turning point on this. Our politicians, legally speaking, were always under the threat of appearing before French courts like any other common citizen of France. But we've seen, like it was said before, the first example of one of our former French presidents being tried and convicted with Mr. Sarkozy. And Marine Le Pen, I think, understood that it could also happen to her after she was convicted the first time. And now she's promised to change her line of defense. And we've seen that she's been less vocal before the trial in appeal than during her trial in first instance. So we'll see how that plays in her favor before the judges or not, because in the conviction judgment, it was indeed reproached to her that she was so vocal against the magistrates during her trial, and she pleaded that she should not appear before them. The judgment said that this line of defense was cause for thinking that she could commit again the facts that she was convicted for. So we'll see how her change of behavior could possibly change not the conviction, but maybe the sentencing before the Court of Appeal.
Perhaps it should be pointed out to our viewers that France is not the United States, where a lot depends on oral arguments.
Yes.
In France, it's the written evidence that the magistrates look at first. And if you look at the ruling from the first trial, they even said Marine Le Pen was not just benefiting from these EU funds for her party, that she was organizing.
Yes. It's true in the sense that France, we do rely a lot on written evidence, not so much on guilty plea or oral statements, but the criminal procedure remains very oral. So she'll have the opportunity to express herself before the Court of Appeal, and her lawyers will also have to plead extensively before the Court of Appeal, before the judges. But it's true that in this case, there are a lot of written material, and they're going to be taken into account by the judges who've taken the time to review every piece of evidence, and who will take the time to discuss every piece of evidence during the trial, which is why it's quite a long trial.
In his best-selling account of the 20 days he spent behind bars, Nicolas Sarkozy spoke about how he was heartened to get a phone call from Marine Le Pen when he was president. Sarkozy, who was no ally of the Le Pen's father and daughter. In both cases, judges refused to suspend sentencing during the appeal process. In Diary of a Prisoner, that's the name of his book, the former president lashed out at judges. So there's two issues. There's whether or not Marine Le Pen can even be on trial for this. And the second one is supporters of her and of Nicolas Sarkozy claiming it's too harsh to put them behind bars, Thierry Lévesque, while they're appealing. Where's the presumption of innocence, they ask?
Both cases are different. It's a smaller corruption case concerning Marine Le Pen, just for
a smaller
million, but just diverting funds by employing basically the funds of European Parliament for paying the wages of party employees. So it's grave, of course, has been punished. But in the Sarkozy case, it is much higher because it was a corruption case with a foreign state and a foreign dictatorship. So anyway, it's not the same. But in both cases, you're right. The power of judges is challenged by these people, and they want to deny actually the possibility of being sentenced, being on trial. So it is a whole system, a whole problematic, which is now at stake. And in the Marine Le Pen, it's perhaps even more important because a presidential candidate is in danger. So it is a fight between two powers, judicial powers, political power. Up to now, until recently, judicial power didn't really dare sentencing for real the prominent politicians, but now they do, and that's the problem.
What's changed? Why do they dare now?
I think they gained their independence in many laws, but also in their minds. In their minds, the epoch is changing, has been changing. It's as simple as that. And also the cases are becoming graver and graver. So that's why the atmosphere has changed around these political scandals.
I don't know if the cases have become more and more serious, Gabriel Siriwari, but it's true that Parliament itself voted measures that called for harsher sentence against people who hold public office and who embezzle funds and the such. Just to remind our viewers here, we're asking about whether the judges can withstand the pressure, if you will, because you have you have the politicians speaking out, but now you also have echo chambers, something you didn't have before. When you look at Marine Le Pen's case and you look at the atmosphere surrounding the first trial and the atmosphere surrounding the trial now, your thoughts?
Exactly. It's a very, very good question. And I'm very happy that you mentioned it also in your presentation. The trial of Nicolas Sarkozy was very striking in this, that it was very striking to me, the trial of the judicial institution very quickly because of this defense line that he adopted, and his supporters and the echo chambers, as you call it, and you're right to do so, the right-wing media that played a big role in this atmosphere. So of course, I have two remarks. First, of course, it increases the pressure on judges. Also, I think there is, but we'll talk about that later, I guess, but there is the international context with also what President Trump in the US has managed to create as an atmosphere towards the judges, and also the insignificance that he tries to give to these financial and political and judicial scandals affecting politicians and himself, first of all. So I think it also plays a role in all this, that you would not be that big a deal anymore, this lack of integrity in politics, and that also the judicial power would be biased. And the second thing is that I have the general impression that the requirement from politicians, the general requirement is lower in terms of integrity. It's getting lower and lower these past few years, precisely because of this atmosphere. And let me give just a few examples. So there was also, of course, the trial of Nicolas Sarkozy. I want to mention that also the conservative candidate in Paris right now, Rachida Dati, that you all know of. She's also gonna be in front of the judges in September 2026. So she's gonna be trialed for corruption. And she's also investigated against in 3 other cases. And it seems to be something that does not play a role anymore in her party, maybe also for the voters, like the conservative voters. So I have this general impression that integrity and the requirement of integrity for politicians
you're talking about you're talking about Rachida Dati.
Yeah.
She's in fact, according to many polls, the front runner to become the next mayor of Paris, and she uses the exact same argument that this is part of a vendetta. This is me, the scrappy kid, against the system.
Exactly, that's extremely shocking to me, and that's something that, and I'm sure the voters in Paris know better than this. But it's true that I think that's a strategy that we would not have seen applied a few years ago, because now you have these echo chambers, you have right-wing media creating this atmosphere, also backing some candidates, clearly Rachida Dati in this case. And I can notice that on sets, like not this one precisely, but on other sets in French channels, it's not that big a deal anymore that she's facing this trial in a few months. And I want to mention that it could mean, should she be elected, that she has to step down 6 months after the election. So that's huge. And it's not something that played against her, neither to stay a member of the government, because she's still a minister of the government, nor to drop from her candidacy. And that's very, very worrying. But I know that I'm sure that the voters and the French people are more attached to integrity than what has been broadcasted in this right-wing media. So I'm quite confident. And also I want to say that it's actually the left that is right now first in the polls, but it's true that it's pretty close.
Polls are tight in Paris. We'll be watching that municipal election. Camille Gosson, let me ask you, because when you look at the long arc of history, there was when François Hollande was president before Emmanuel Macron, huge scandal because his budget minister, who'd been calling on people to tighten their belts, turns out he'd been funneling money to Switzerland. And then there were bills passed. So are people willing to accept more corruption than before? Is that your sense or less?
My sense as a lawyer is actually the contrary, that people are becoming more and more aware of the corruption that's been going on for several years now in our governments, as revealed by many investigations. And as a result of this consciousness, we've passed more and more laws against this corruption. And as Mr. Lévesque was talking about earlier, we've passed more laws that gave the tools to our judges and to our judicial system to actually try to go after the ones who are suspected of such acts.
So you're kind of contradicting him, because he said the scandals are bigger than they used to be. You're saying we now have the tools to find where the scandals are.
I'm not sure that they're bigger, but maybe they are, because the world of today is very different than the world was like 100 years ago. Now we have access to more people, foreign people, and we have access to more money. So the cases get bigger and bigger in terms of amount and in terms of people involved. But the facts remain basically the same. And my sense is that those types of cases now come more into light. So we feel like there are more cases because we are more aware, we are more informed, thanks to the media, thanks to people like you revealing such things, and thanks to the judges and the prosecutors who investigate afterwards. But I don't know if there are more cases, just that we are more aware of it and we have more tools now.
In the case of Marine Le Pen, it's making for sometimes awkward moments. Her legal bothers prompting public backing from her 30-year-old number two, Jordan Bardella.
It would be deeply worrying for democracy if the justice system were to deprive the French people of a candidate in the presidential election who has already qualified twice for the second round and is now considered the undisputed favorite in the polls.
All right, so not arguing the points of the case, simply saying it would look odd to voters if she couldn't run. Voters who increasingly say they don't mind if it's Bardella instead of Le Pen. In a poll conducted, there were more who felt Bardella had, for Le Monde newspaper, more who felt Bardella had a better chance of winning, 49% to 18% if the presidential election were held tomorrow. More who felt the former would make a better candidate, 30% for Bardella to 22% for Le Pen. And perhaps most significantly, 50% feel the far-right leader is being treated just like any other defendant, to 39% who feel she's being treated more harshly for political reasons. So those echo chambers only go so far, Thierry Lévesque. According to that poll, there's still half the country who says, well, these are the facts, she's an ordinary citizen.
Well, basically, their fans of Marine Le Pen believe it's a political trial, and the other ones reject this idea. But I think one must stress that Bardella is not completely immune from this prosecution, because he was himself an assistant parlementaire, a parliamentary aide in Strasbourg in 2015, and he received 15,000 euro, which was out of the prosecution for technical reasons. But basically, he's himself in cause in this trial. Perhaps he will also be mentioned. There is a month ahead of hearings. So the whole party, actually, and himself also, is involved in this.
And yet we're
case.
less than 2 years out from the presidential election, and either Marine Le Pen or Jordan Bardella would be the front runner. And according to that poll, he'd even have a better chance than she would.
No, I think it's the same for politically. It doesn't change a lot. Actually, people, the National Rally, the Le Pen's party is ahead and far ahead in the polls. Is a favorite of the presidential election, and I don't think this hearing, this trial, will change anything to that. Le Pen or Bardella, they're still far ahead from the others. So basically, it is a judicial problem. And we should not treat it as a political problem.
All right. Paris traffic could not keep away. Franco-American attorney Randy Yalloz, president of Republicans Overseas France. Thanks for joining our conversation.
Thank you for having me today.
Is it true you were held up because of the farmers' protest?
Yeah, exactly, for the last 20 minutes. But it's good that they're protesting, right? They're out there. Unfortunately, I was stuck in traffic, but I think they're doing a job of showing what their rights are and that they're standing up to things that they believe are very important to them.
Is justice blind in the case of Marine Le Pen?
Justice is always a question of whether it's blind, but it's also a question of timing. I think justice also has a question of when you decide to have a case for highly political figures, you have to determine when and how you manage those type of judicial cases. As you had the case of Mr. Fillon, you have the case of Mr. Trump in the United States. It's a question of, can it influence the outcome of elections?
By the way, the appeals court fast-tracked so that she would have, after that appeal, the chance still to run for president.
I think that's a positive point from that standing. But at the same time, you have the exécution provisoire, which was immediate. So the judges also, it's a question that whether, okay, it's fast track, but still,
like for now,
she can't do anything for now. She's also prevented. It had a consequence on her popularity. So the fact that there was exécution provisoire did have a political impact, because when you look at the case judicially and in public opinion, it had gone down about 35 to 40%. She's around 19% today, and before she was around 45, 50% just a few months ago before that. So today, the case is that it's still standing, and the question is today, if there's exécution provisoire, it did have an effect, I think, on public opinion.
Yeah, exécution provisoire means that the sentence right now, in terms of at least her being ineligible to run,
execution of the judgment, enforcement,
is enforced. Camille Gosson, do you agree that it's...
if you don't commit any felony, you don't have this kind of problem.
You understand what happens is that...
But is there a presumption of innocence during the appeals process?
It's applied to all the persons who are on trial every day. At the moment we're speaking, all the persons who are trialed for small felonies are sent to prison in the first sentence. So why not for her?
And there is always a presumption of innocence. The provisional enforcement aims at ensuring that the sentence that was passed in first instance and that could be passed in appeal would have effect. In the case of Marine Le Pen, would she be elected before the trial in appeal? Then for the sentence ordered by the tribunal of first instance would become moot. So the judges issued that decision. They actually motivated their judgment based on this, based on the necessity to protect that measure in case of the election. They took it into account the political and the social context in the decision. But that does not mean that right now she's not still presumed innocent, because legally speaking, she is.
Gabriel Siriouari, you just heard Thierry Lévesque state that in 70% to 80% of felony cases in France, they do force you to go to jail while you're appealing. Is the law too harsh in France?
Well, what is striking here, I think, is the huge hypocrisy on this topic, precisely from these right-wing personalities that are in trial right now, because they are the first ones precisely to request that small felonies be civilly convicted and immediately applied, and now they're contesting it for themselves. And also on what you were just saying, if I understood correctly, and I think that's something that's very interesting in Marine Le Pen's trial right now, is that this execution provisoire was justified by the judges by the fact that she would not have a sufficient awareness of the gravity of or the seriousness of this case and of her actions. And I understand that she now intends to amend this line of defense and maybe recognize a little more that she understands that it was a big deal, which is, of course, a totally different line of defense than saying that it is a political trial, which she has been doing so far. And in Nicolas Sarkozy's case, the execution provisoire, if I remember correctly, it's because of the seriousness of the acts committed, and to insist that it's something that is so huge and that harms so many people, and also the image of the Republican institutions, that it has to be immediately applied. So I think these two aspects, but of course there are specialists on the set that can explain that better than I do, but I think these were very, very interesting points in terms of, this execution provisoire matter.
All right, well, back in the spring when Marine Le Pen was first convicted, Donald Trump took to Truth Social to brand it as, quote, another example of European leftists using lawfare to silence free speech and censor their political opponents. More recently, the U.S. State Department last week firmly denying a report from German news magazine Der Spiegel that the Trump administration was weighing sanctions against French magistrates involved in the Marine Le Pen case, calling it misinformation. That said, a nagging doubt persists. This after U.S. sanctions against 9 judges and prosecutors from the International Criminal Court, including France's Nicolas Guillou for the ICC's decision to slap a warrant on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. That includes a travel ban and the freezing from any digital platform that trades in U.S. dollars.
Since he is the subject of American sanctions, he is deprived of payment means, unable to access messaging services, and can no longer travel to the United States. In short, he is essentially banned, and this really raises significant concern because we wonder, could French magistrates, for instance, who may be called to intervene in cases involving American interests, also be subject to such sanctions? This explains the context, but as for the upcoming trial, let's stay calm and cautious.
All right, so let's stay calm and cautious. The Trump administration's support for Marine Le Pen, making the national rally uneasy, as reported by Politico, which quotes 3 party members, including Alexandre Sabatou, that's a member of the France-U.S. Friendship Group in the National Assembly. He traveled to Trump's inauguration, saying, as a staunch defender of France as a sovereign nation, it bugs me. Randy Gallows, is there such a thing as too much support from Donald Trump for Marine Le Pen?
Too much? I think President Trump suffered quite a lot regarding the politicization of the judicial system in the United States. And I think today we're seeing the effects. So going back to Mrs. Le Pen's situation, if she has the provisional enforcement of this judgment against her, she's preventing from campaigning, she's preventing from having specific funds. She totally inhibited by her the whole process of going and preparing for these elections. So in fact, it has an adverse impact on the preparation of these elections. Tomorrow, within several months from now, if she's deemed to be innocent, the whole machine was put in place. And I don't think it would have made a big difference if they did not provide her with provisional enforcement of this judgment. And on appeal, they finally decided it was the case. Mr. Trump is saying is that it is important to preserve the liberty. This was the main candidate for going to the next elections. And it's important that there are certain guarantees, institutional guarantees that are put in place, that justice is done. And if she is held to be criminally liable and must be sentenced for what she does, they should have waited on the appeal, especially given the situation, given we're in a democratic country, and given today what we see in the criminal procedures.
Do you share the concern of the state prosecutor of the highest court, the court that we heard in that clip, saying because there's been this this precedent with the Trump administration slapping sanctions on a French judge who's at the International Criminal Court, that there is this feeling of uneasiness that maybe Washington will weigh in when it comes to Marine Le Pen.
I think there are issues regarding, that there's weighing in on different areas. That is, I imagine, for the Trump administration to assume that.
Would it be a good idea if Donald Trump did weigh in?
I think that support that they provided is the reasonable support. They stated how they felt and communicated about they felt that it was a form of lawfare. Whether the judges were harsh, I think they could have done otherwise to at least address the legal issue, the very important legal issue of provisional enforcement that was done. At the same time, I think the judges, the French, the Trump in regarding the arrest warrant regarding Netanyahu was specific to that case, and it was much more problematic because the position that was taken by the court went against evidence that was presented, whereas here it wasn't. It was a question of how the judgment was being held and to what extent the judgment would prevent her from presenting her as a candidate to these elections. Where there, they were forcing Mr. Netanyahu not to be able to travel across the world, and they were preventing having him to be arrested whether across Europe
But if
and many
Marine Le Pen
countries.
loses on appeal, would you be in favor of Donald Trump sanctioning the judges?
I don't think it's for Mr. Trump to get involved in those type of situations. I think on the appeal, if the two courts decide, I think that's the situation that because the normal thing today is once you're in appeal, you don't have provisional prevention of the sentencing. You have to go to jail in France. So that's the way the cases works, and that should be the case.
Camille Gosson, how thick-skinned are magistrates in France? Will they shrug off any outside pressure if it does come? Again, it's a hypothetical at this point.
In France, we have set up, contrary to the US, for example, a very clear distinction, a clearer distinction between the judges and the government. In the US, for example, the judges, they are elected. In France, it's not the case. So they are, in a sense, more independent from the executive, but they're still human. So if they receive death threats, for example, or sanctions from the US, like our judges at the ICC, then we're not immune to them plunging for under threat. So the law is here to protect them, but we also have to set up practical and maybe political protection measures, because it's been said by the US that Trump is not thinking of sanctioning the judges. But if he does, we don't have much to protect them against that. At the firm, we do a lot of sanctions cases, and it's something that we've been raising actually, both for the sanctions by the US, but also sanctions from the EU and from the UK. And basically, it's a power within the hands of the executive. And in the US, it's Donald Trump himself signing the sanction. And he can decide on sanctioning anyone as long as he deems that they go contrary to the US interest. And then the only recourse that people targeted have is to go before a judge in the US and plead their case, but it's very difficult and usually impossible. And other than that, we don't have any safeguards to protect them against that. So if this is a real threat, even if it's just an hypothesis for now, it's something that our legislators should think about and will have to think about with the expansion of sanctions law in the recent years.
Gabrielle Siri-Wari, are you worried of U.S. meddling in this trial?
Well, I must say that it's a threat that definitely exists in the sense that it has happened before. So you've mentioned the French judge at the International Penal Court, but there was also the Brazilian judge who convicted Jair Bolsonaro. So it's kind of a general system of pressure and threat that President Trump is using at the international level to back his political allies. And what is very, very noticeable right now is the lack of sovereignty and independence in the EU that makes us very vulnerable to these threats and these sanctions. And by that, I mean that it was explained that for the French judge, it means an incapacity to access its bank accounts, the means of payments that are in their vast majority American. And we need at the EU level to develop European means of payment to ensure that we're immune to these threats and sanctions that are definitely existing right now. And maybe I just one, yes.
Go ahead.
It's a topic I know well because I've been working on this at the Commission until a few months ago, and there is this EU strategy called preparedness that is specifically aimed at responding to this geopolitical turmoil and making the EU more independent and sovereign and immune to all these threats. And maybe just one last thing is that something that Raphael Glucksmann points out very often and is right to do so is the kind of irony that the Rassemblement National wants to appear as very patriots, and they're actually very concerned by, now this U.S. ingerence, the
U.S. interference. This is the center-left candidate
interference.
From the...
Yes, exactly, and also other RN, Rassemblement National political figures like Thierry Mariani, who's also a candidate in Paris for the Rassemblement National, was celebrating the annexion of Crimea, and all this shows, and there was also this affair of the loan from Russia, the last presidential elections. So there is also this, the very striking hypocrisy from the Rassemblement National between their patriot image and the reality of the facts.
Let's bring it back to this case here. There was, you've been covering the judiciary, police cases for years.
For quite a while. Yeah.
Do you feel as though the French system is as solid as ever, or losing a bit of that sovereignty that's...
It has gained independence. It's for sure. It has gained independence since I began in this issue. We notice that the penalties are harsher and harsher in the corruption scandals, and the independence of magistrates has increased. And the laws voted by the very politicians who are at stake at the moment, including the National Front, including Madame Le Pen, proposed in her presidential campaigns to bar from election for life people who embezzle funds, public funds. So she is a victim of what she has herself proposed. So all of these elements lead to, I think, a better system where the corruption is punished, and is punished by the same laws, by the same rules as for ordinary citizens. And we should not speak about that, basically. If you commit a felony, you are sentenced. The law applies to you as for an ordinary citizen, and Mr. Trump has nothing to do with that. He's not involved in this case. He's not French. He's not a magistrate. He's just the president of the States.
Radigalos, you argue cases in both the United States and in France. Yeah. Let me ask you, do you feel as though it's different in France, the judiciary, that magistrates are different, that they are more independent? Do you agree with Thierry?
They have independence as they have safeguards, as we were saying in the United States. They have equivalent safeguards. In France, the question is more to ask about how are the sentences applied. And I think when you look at different types of criminal cases, you need to look to drug-related, trafficking, all these types of cases where you see that the multiple repeated offenders that go out and they're free on the streets several times. Yes, you see that in court, that they're sentenced. Yes, they were quite often.
Prisons are overflowing in France.
Yeah, but many times they are coming afterwards. There's several times when you have multiple offenders, the police officers, when you speak to police officers, that they arrest different individuals 20, 22 times for the same types of offenses. They're repeat offenders, and they're not handled the same way, and they're back on the street, and the courts are not properly handling certain types of offenses and certain types of felonies. And that's where the issue is.
Frequently
and
in the French courts,
let me explain to you. Let me finish. You've had the time.
You.
Excuse me. Let me finish, madam. Why are you? Did I interrupt you? You see, if you're uncomfortable with the issue, let me just finish.
I'm not uncomfortable. I was going to cite the statistics that go just
let me,
right
don't
against
interrupt me,
you just
madam.
said.
Please. I didn't interrupt you, and so I didn't interrupt you both. Okay? Now, let's just finish on one point. When you're looking at a specific case, you have to also consider the ramifications when you're dealing with a democracy and you're in a specific case, okay? And you must take into account that the leading cases in the last 5 to 6 years were against presidential candidates and former presidential candidates. There's a question to ask why we have right-wing presidential candidates that have been primarily targeted when you have similar type of issues that were also targeting other parties and have been involved, whereas Mr. Mélenchon had similar issues. And why was he not being facing issues today, who's the leftist main candidate today? He had issues in court. Why weren't they timed to be at the election time? Why were not they were? Yes, there are issues that are coming
There's
up.
a case pending against.
Yes, but we don't hear about it. Might not prevent him from going into court and presenting himself to the next elections. And we don't talk about that, and we don't see positioned ourselves how the court scheduling of the cases has been in a similar way as is done for Mrs. Le Pen, Mr. Fillon, or maybe Mr. Sarkozy in certain cases. So there are issues that need to be addressed, and that they're being instrumentalized and may possibly politicized. We don't know, and I think the courts really need to work on that. And I think they should have prevented having gone to provisional enforcement. That would have helped to give more confidence to the public regarding having an effect and an adverse impact on elections.
Camille Gosson.
Yeah, what I was going to say is that the statistics in France are that in cases where the sentence is 10 years and more of imprisonment, in 90% of cases, provisional enforcement is ordered. And these are the statistics. You can check afterwards. And I actually invite the people who are watching to check the statistics, because when you receive an information, it's important that you go check afterwards. So you can go check the statistics. And even without talking about it, as a criminal lawyer and as a friend of other criminal lawyers, this is something we've been talking about, and an issue we've been raising for years now, is that provisional enforcement of sentences is ordered without any real motivation in a lot of cases. And this is actually very interesting that it's going into the debate now with the cases of Nicolas Sarkozy and Marine Le Pen. And this is actually, if the people are against it, they should take it with the legislator, because the judges, they're only applying the law here. They're using the tools that have been given to them, as Mr. Lévesque said before, some by the very politicians that are now challenging them when they're being applied to them.
All right, we'll have to unfortunately leave it there. There was much more to talk about. We'll pick up on this as this case progresses. Marine Le Pen's verdict will be in July. I want to thank Camille Gosson. I want to thank Thierry Lévesque, Randy Yallows, Gabrielle Siri-Wari. Didn't get to ask you whether or not there'd be legislative elections on the same day. Those municipal elections have been talk of it, perhaps, but maybe that'll be for another time. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.
Thank you.